So now I need Errin Haines up here, who's going to moderate our very first panel discussion, someone I've been following in the news for years. I'm so proud of you. There aren't even words, I'm telling you. So good to see you. So good to see you. Yes, so we're going to be discussing what journalism looks like from an equitable and sustainable point of view. Errin Haines is the editor-at-large at the 19th and a Lenfest Institute board member. She will lead the conversation with Cierra Hinton. Are you here? Come on up. Mazin Sidahmed. I hope I said your name. Did I say your name correctly? Praise the Lord. Thank you. And Cierra Alvarez. All right, Errin, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Jim, Sean, you all have kicked off, given us the momentum to really have a conversation that I'm super excited to have with our fellow journalists. As Andrea said, I'm Errin Haines. I'm editor-at-large for the 19th. I'm also a Lenfest Institute board member, and for Philadelphia purposes, I am the contributing editor of A More Perfect Union, which is a year-long series that looks into the institutional inequality that was born right alongside many of the institutions that were started here in Philadelphia. And so, as somebody who started their career in the Black press, hello, Philadelphia Tribune, hello to Philadelphia royalty, Bob Bogle, I certainly am very happy to see you all represented front and center here. So, as founding mother of the 19th, which, in case you are not familiar, is a news organization that I helped co-found in January of 2020, we are focused on the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. I am really excited to help unpack today's topic with today's panel. And let me introduce them. I am joined by Cierra Alvarez, who is founder and editor-in-chief of Outlier Media, a Detroit-based service journalism organization. Exactly, please give it up for Cierra. If you do not know about Outlier Media, you should. They seek to empower residents to make change by holding the city's powerful accountable. Welcome, Sarah. You too. Cierra Hinton, to my right, is the executive director and publisher of Scalawag. Yes, absolutely, a fan. This is not a South Philly accent. I am a Southerner, and Scalawag is definitely long been a part of my journalism diet. So Scalawag works through journalism and storytelling in solidarity with oppressed communities in service of a more liberated South. Cannot think of a better and higher mission. Mazin Sidahmed is co-founder and senior reporter at Documented. Yes, please, please, yes. Doing such important work as a nonprofit news site focused solely on coverage of New York City's immigrant community and the policies that affect their lives. So welcome to all of you, and let's get started. I'm gonna just start off the conversation with an open question about what today's theme means to each of you. I wanna know how you're thinking about reimagining journalism in your organizations, particularly in this moment for our society and for our democracy. And let's see, we'll go to my far right and we'll come back in. So Mazin, you kick it off.
Great, thank you so much for having us. It's really great to be here and to be with these two people that I really admire a lot. I think for us, you know, I came from a really traditional news background before we started Documented, and being empowered to really rethink the way that we do journalism as a founder of my own organization and actually start thinking about how we can create news that low-wage, often marginalized communities will actually read and want to engage with, has been and probably the best experience of my life. So I think that when I think about reimagining journalism, it's really about humbling yourself and asking people what they would actually want from a news product, what news is actually important to them and is valuable to them in their real day-to-day lives, and then just going out and doing that in a really focused and determined way.
Yeah. Sarah, what would you add to that?
I agree with all of those things, and I think that the reimagination of journalism needs to be almost like a full reimagining, almost a start from scratch situation. We have a lot of skills as journalists that are fundamental to the work that we do. And I believe that those skills transfer to a new world where journalism can be an essential service, which is what I want to see, in service of communities and in service of self-determination for those people. But I think that we often confuse keeping the skills and improving our skills with keeping power structures that already exist, keeping practices that don't serve the community and maybe only serve us. So the thing that I also want to see is a much more redistributive model of work, right? Like we have for too long, and I say we, but I didn't do this. I was not in this industry. This was not my fault. So let me be clear, nor like were folks like us allowed to be in this industry very much and don't have these practices because they don't serve us or our communities. But I would like to see us in service to communities, redistributing the power that we have, the skills that we have, the programs that we have, the connections that we have, because I do think that we need to work more collaboratively, not just in the industry, but with communities of practice, like shout out to documenters and the documenters community and the people who are invested in a more equitable future. And I also think that we need to be very cognizant that there are very many people who are not invested in a more equitable future. And if we want to do that, and if we want to be that as news organizations, we need to take, you know, ourselves seriously and work towards this goal and listen to folks like Cierra and say, this is what we are, this is what we're doing, and let's be unapologetic about it and really try to work towards goals, because we cannot, as we often say in Detroit, we've had 2 Pulitzer Prize winning dailies for 150 years, and Detroit is still the poorest city in the country, and this is a failure, and we can't hold ourselves up as an industry to preserve democracy when that's a truth.
Well, let's listen to Cierra. Cierra, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think for us at Scalawag, we are explicitly and expressly consciousness-raising media. And that is super important, I think, in this time when there is an ideological battle happening, right? And this industry in particular, in our quest to maintain our allegiance to objectivity, refuses to take a side in that battle. And so we sort of stand in the middle while there are folks whose ideology is actively harming people who look like me, who hold my identities, and leaving people who look like me, who hold my identities, to fight that battle for ourselves. And we don't have the power. And what's, like, I think even more harmful is that a lot of the folks who are in power within this industry actually also have privilege and power in other ways, and that they are white, they are men, they have access to wealth. And so, you know, when we're talking about reimagining, right, it's like thinking about journalism within the larger system, which is something that we fail to do also because of objectivity. And so it's like, what are we actually doing here? If we're saying that we are on the side of democracy, if we're saying we are on the side of freedom, if we believe in liberty and liberation, what does that actually look like? What does it look like to do journalism and practice journalism in service of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. All such good points. And, you know, I think there's a reason that everybody up here on this panel are all people of color, because necessity is often the mother of invention and imagination, right? We are people who have had to think about doing this work differently, but really, you know, when we talk about reimagining journalism, we are not only talking about doing the work differently, we are really talking about reimagining this entire industry that we all love so much, but that we also know has not been serving everybody that is in this democracy in service of making this a freer and fairer society for everyone, right? So, you know, again, necessity, the mother of reimagination. That's also has to be true of journalism. It's why publications like all of ours exist, And so, Sarah, I want to come to you and ask just kind of what is the void that you are filling in Detroit for people who don't know, the void that you're filling in Detroit that you really saw was missing in the journalism ecosystem out there?
Yeah, well, I think, so Detroit is a city with a lot of needs. And it's a city where those needs are really because of systematic disinvestment and undervaluing of the folks who live there. So what we tried to do at Outlier, because we started very small, when Outlier started, it was just me and almost no budget. So we've always tried to just kind of do what we could achieve at that moment and be useful. But we've always sought to fill information gaps first. We are trying to get useful information to people so that they can make the decisions about their own lives, that they, I think a lot of us in this industry don't trust people, don't trust our audience to be capable, smart, wonderful, rational. We've always believed that, our audience is us, and we've just tried to equip people. So we fill a need by giving people information that they can use to create more accountability for themselves. And we then address accountability gaps when information can't solve the problem. We preserve our resources to do investigative and watchdog reporting on systemic problems where the harm is very acute or very widespread. We never choose our own topics. We do a lot of data work, so we're trying to figure out where are these biggest information and accountability gaps in the city, and we respond to those. And so we cover housing, utilities, city government, transportation, and we'll soon be adding climate resilience and environmental justice.
All such great points, and yes, really trying to figure out, not dictating to your audience what you think that they should know about, but what it is that the information that they need, right? And that really is such an important point that you're making, and I want to zoom out to everybody else because, what we are talking about is journalism that is not just about being a powerful institution, but that is really about sharing power and about empowering our audiences. Part of reimagining journalism is centering those marginalized folks in our communities as the focus and the audience for this work. And so I want to ask everybody to talk about what that looks like and why it matters for people in our industry who still do not understand that, and how that distinguishes what your outlets are doing from what legacy mainstream publications are still doing and frankly doing wrong.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think a lot of times when people think about, diversifying media and all of these kind of conversations that I've been in for so long, they're just thinking about censuses of their internal staff. Like how can we kind of change the composition of our internal staff, put a few people here, put a few people there, and then like check the box and then it's done. But if you want to actually change the people that you're reaching, change the conversation that you're having with your local market, reimagine what your news institution looks like, it requires an entire restructuring and a refocusing around what people actually want, like what Sarah just said. Like, we actually learned that. Like, when we started Documented, we wanted to create a news site that wasn't just about immigrants, it was actually for immigrants. And we came from traditional journalism backgrounds. We're like, we're dope, we're journalists, we're gonna do dope stuff. We launched the site, we're gonna do great investigative work, and we're gonna translate it, and everyone's gonna read it. The problem is no one's translating these stories. And when we would do that, everyone in the media would, clap for us on Twitter and say, oh, you lot are doing amazing. But we would look at the analytics and no one was reading those stories in Spanish. So we had to ask ourselves, why is that? So we actually went to the communities and asked them, what do you want? What do you want from us? We partner with master's university class in New York and had them do information needs assessments and research different communities in the city and ask, what would you actually want from us? One thing that Sarah says that I find really powerful is that we have power. We have a skill set that is amazing. I hear journalists all the time talk about, I can't do anything but report. That is huge. That is a massive skill that is really transformative and gives you access to so many things that people don't understand. So people told us that, every time they see themselves in the media, they're either victims or criminals. The thing that they really want is information about how to navigate government resources. How can they get around these programs that are supposed to be useful to them that they don't even know how to access? And the people were actually getting their information from informal WhatsApp channels and community groups in their church or just their friends and families. So when we completely reshifted the way that we did things, focused on WhatsApp, and actually built a WhatsApp news service that's now become like the engine of our newsroom, that changed the dynamic of our journalism completely. And now the stories that we publish in Spanish are consistently the most read stories, and we have a genuine relationship with the community, but it required an entire restructuring of our organization. And once again, to humble ourselves and be like, we don't know what's best. Like, we can't tell people this is the best information just because we have a journalism education. We have to ask people what they want and actually go out and execute on that. And I think that's the part that a lot of people are missing.
Cierra, can you jump in here and talk about why centering marginalized communities has to be the way that we do this work going forward?
Yeah, I think especially if we're talking about reimagining, that takes me to how I think about equity. And for me, it's equity is when the most marginalized person in the room has everything that they need to be successful, to thrive, right? So if there is a disabled Black trans woman who is poor in this room and she does not have everything that she needs to thrive, then the space is not equitable. So when we're thinking about who needs to be leading, who can tell us what is actually equitable, it is the most marginalized folks, and that is why we have to center them. That is why that's where our starting point needs to be. That's why that's where our standard of who should be leading, right? Who we are trying to reach, who we're trying to serve, that's where we actually should be looking to. And then I think the other thing that I would say is, as a Black queer woman, who is constantly oppressed, constantly marginalized, I see a lot. I experience a lot that a lot of other folks don't see and experience, and it gives me a broader sight, right? And so there's also just a foresight that I have. There's things that I can see, that I can watch out for, that I can tell people about because I'm experiencing them in a way that other folks who have more power and privilege and access are not gonna be able to see. So that's another reason why centering marginalized people, centering folks who have more of those experiences can help us build the sort of equitable, transformative world that we want to hopefully be a part of.
Yeah, and also centering them as leaders, just as you are, because we go on behalf of everybody that needs to be in the room, that needs to have power, that needs to have access to resources, that needs to be able to participate in this society more equitably. Sarah, did you want to chime in before we go to the next one?
I do. I just want to, I think that a lot of news organizations are still trying to go after this idea of an elite audience that is already proximate to power. That if we can get the policymakers to read our work, right? If we can get the governor to read this thing, and that's an audience of 1, that's an audience of 5, right? And there is no reason that a news organization should serve such a small audience. And I really want to see news organizations get over this idea of an elite audience and to really to push themselves and try to get a general audience, because that is where power does come from, right? And it doesn't dumb down things. It's really challenging to reach a general audience. And if you are able to, then like Mazin said, that you're actually providing information that people can really use. So I want to see us center more marginalized people, and I also want to see us decenter people who already have more than they need in terms of information and access to power when we're thinking about who our audience should be. We want to reach as many people as we can who need our service.
And I think the thing about that is it's harder, right? It takes more time, it takes more resources, And like we work in an industry where you are actually rewarded for putting out content faster, for publishing faster, right? The 24/7 news cycle, like, you know, even before that, but especially now, like the more that you publish, the more money that you make. And so, like, again, if we're thinking about reimagining, we're talking about transformation, even in our business models and how we have this whole thing set up, we're rewarded for actually producing more content, but that is the opposite of what we have to do if we actually want to be in partnership and in community with folks and be doing the sort of like reporting that we want to be doing if we actually want to be serving community.
Well, you know, then I guess I have to ask the follow-up question to this. In rethinking that model, equitable journalism that is also sustainable journalism. What are your ideas about how we get there?
So there are a lot of people who have money, and they have a lot of money. And some of those folks are independently wealthy. Some of those folks are, our government also has money. There are so many places where there's just a lot of money in the world. And so what does it look like to redistribute that wealth, right? And to actually fund journalism. And I start there because making journalism is expensive, right? And, you know, I'm someone who, in addition to my work at Scalawag, I'm also a coach, and I believe strongly in reader revenue, and I'll talk about that like in a second. But to like actually start a news organization, you need money up front, and you need lots of money up front. And traditionally that money has like come from folks being like having family businesses and having the money to have that investment, or being able to have access to privilege and power and get that investment from a bank, et cetera. That's not what a lot of us have, right? And so how do we get folks to invest in media and have that money on the front end so that folks can actually build these organizations, have the runway to like grow their organizations and get them started. And then once they're getting started, as they're building their audiences, that's when we bring in the reader revenue model, right? Whether it's a donor model, a membership model, a subscription model. You know, if you really, I think a true testament to an audience really trusting you and believing in your work is whether or not they're willing to invest in it. Understanding that like that investment is a lagging indicator of a reciprocal relationship. You've earned their trust enough that they're going to give you their money. That's a big deal under capitalism, especially. And so that's how I think about how we sustain and fund media organizations.
Yeah, absolutely true. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a few layers to it, and I would agree with everything Cierra said. Like, from a philanthropic perspective, I think that the philanthropic community has to stop looking at this type of work as a side issue and like a nice to fund thing that we can do as a collaborative, a thing that we can do, you know, just some capacity support here and there, and really treat it as essential to our democracy thriving, and needs to be core to the way that people are thinking about a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. So I think that's one element of it. I think from a commercialization perspective, we're part of the URL Media Network. There is a big opportunity here from a commercial perspective if these organizations are well-resourced, that, like Sarah says, we're reaching more people. You know, we're reaching more people, we're reaching people that other people want to reach, and there are a lot of different ways that we can commercialize our work, but doing that requires a lot of capital. You know, like building out those types of departments that can actually leverage the opportunities that we have is very expensive. And people need to invest in us to really get us to that level, and we don't ever really see that type of investment in the type of work that we do.
And I think there's plenty of, like you said, there's plenty of money out there. And there's a lot of folks who are already being subsidized, right? Like philanthropy, we're philanthropically funded. You know, we're being subsidized, and I don't feel bad about that in any way, shape, or form, because we're really trying to reach as broad a segment of the public as possible. But I want to issue a challenge to a lot of public television and public radio stations that are publicly funded and say that they represent the public and serve the public, and they don't. And I come from public radio. It doesn't serve enough of the public. And so if we're also talking about subsidizing work, which there needs to be subsidized media work in every community, because it's not always going to make money, and there's always going to be a need that cannot actually make money, and it's not going to be sustainable, but it's fundamental. And I think we have to be really conscious about who's getting subsidized for what and who are they reaching, right?
Yeah. Also, just noting that a lot of us up here at our nonprofit newsrooms, the 19th is also a nonprofit newsroom, because what's the point of covering these marginalized communities if they can't afford to read the journalism? We are free to republish, free to consume for all of our readers, and that is part of what we believe is how we get to sustainable equity. So, Mazin, I want to come back down to you to ask, the work that you all are doing at Documented, do you feel like that reporting, do you feel like the model that you are doing in terms of reimagining journalism is pushing your colleagues in New York City to report differently on immigration? And what have you learned about what your peers, I guess, are not considering, still not considering, in how to do this job better?
Yeah, well, they steal our stories, so we know that they
There's
do
that.
enjoy our work to an extent. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that we are consistently one of the only reporters at a lot of the events that we go to cover. You know, we have a Chinese community correspondent who recently joined our team. She went to a press conference of, you know, tenants whose building had burnt down and they weren't given any compensation, who were protesting that. And she was the only reporter there, and that happens to us a lot. And after we publish those stories, other media end up picking up on it and covering it. But you know, New York City is experiencing what every other city in America is experiencing with cuts to local media. You know, we have all of these national shops there that have just kind of abandoned local journalism or focusing on, you know, trying to have a global perspective. And that's meant that, yeah, the communities that have never been served well by media, like even, you know, nobody in New York is really mourning the death of, not nobody in New York, but the communities that we serve are not really mourning the death of a lot of these major publications that are there. No one's really sad that they're experiencing all of these cuts. And I think that's because they never really had a genuine relationship with those organizations and didn't have, those organizations didn't have a presence in their communities. So we are trying to be the first news outlet that actually listens to the community, serves the needs that they actually have, and builds a genuine relationship with them. And yeah, a lot of people in New York City want to partner with us. They see the work that we're doing and are trying to, you know, leverage our relationships in different ways. But yeah, New York's struggling like every other place, really. So it's hard to really see changes in a community where most of the news organizations are shrinking.
More partnership, less poaching, for whoever's watching out there. Well, we're going to go to audience questions here in a minute, so please get your questions ready. I see hands are already starting to go up, but before we get to that, just want to close this part of the panel discussion out with how you all are reimagining journalism going forward for the next phases of your newsrooms, and what your hope is for the imagination of our industry. Sarah, I'll start with you this time.
We want to be an essential service. Our goal is to be an essential service, and our goal is to work in collaboration and have a healthy Detroit, right? We're trying to reimagine journalism to think less about ourselves and more about the community and what the goals are there, and how can we be of service to those goals.
Cierra?
Yeah, I think for us, we hope that to give folks media that helps them imagine something beyond this system. You know, we are an abolitionist media organization. Like, we truly believe that there is something beyond racial capitalism, there is something beyond white supremacy, that this system that we're existing in right now does not have to be the way that we continue to exist. We can exist collectively. And like, but if folks can't imagine that, right? Like, if they can't see that, like, we can't get there. The vision is the first part. So how do we actually help folks vision something beyond this so that then we can begin to do my favorite part, which is strategize how we get there?
I think we're trying to build what we think is the modern local newsroom, a local newsroom that actually genuinely serves the majority of a city, a modern American city, that is in multiple languages, that is in multiple distribution channels, that makes reporting decisions based on what the community says they need, as opposed to what journalists decide is most important for the day.
Well, with that, we're going to open it up to the audience. I guess is somebody going to, yes, I am going to start at this head table. Bob, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to come around, and I'll try to get to as many of you as possible.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I first would like to thank those who instigated this meeting, who made it possible. And I'm encouraged by your comment. Our newspaper, which has served the African American community for 138 years, has suffered all the things you've talked about. But there's another side to this. How do you stay in business? I mean, you speak as journalists. I can speak as the person who runs it, and the ability to stay in business. And we don't have anyone who philanthropically provides an avenue to do all the things you talk about. So there are a few things that have to be taken into consideration when you articulate what you think as a journalist we should do, and what do we do that balances that to sustainability? And that becomes a very serious question. We have fought this battle for a long time, when there were those who didn't want us to do it, and there are probably still many who don't want us to do it now. But survival and sustainability, in view of what you say we ought to be doing, in spite of the fact that we've been doing what you say we should be doing, how do we stay in business? And I'd like to know what you say is an outcome that we should pursue to achieve a balanced outcome to what you say.
Yeah, so I should have led with that maybe. I'm not a journalist. I'm a publisher. I came to this work as actually a nonprofit fundraiser and accidentally became an executive director publisher. I think for specifically publishers of color that have been doing work in communities of color for a long time, and especially for the Black Legacy Press, I know folks get weird when this word gets thrown around. They are owed reparations. Money is owed, and maybe folks don't feel like that is a sustainable way to do this, but I do think money is owed. There are communities that have been served, that have been neglected for years and years and years. They have been doing an outsized amount of that work, and so money, while other organizations have been making tons and tons of money on the backs of those communities. And so money needs to be shifted into the folks who have actually been doing the work. So I think that is one way for media and communities of color to get the funding that they need to not only survive, but to thrive. And then I think beyond that, there's a really big question around just how we not just reimagine how we do the practice of journalism and our reporting and storytelling, but just our models overall, right? And so I think that's a longer conversation, but I do think that first point is really important, and it's not one that I hear a lot of folks talking about, but it's very true, especially for the Black Legacy Press.
Really interesting. Reparations has entered the Reimagining Journalism chat. Okay, we're going to take another one. Yes, right behind you here.
My name is Indah from Indonesian Lantern. My question is for Cierra. You said that you don't choose your topics, but you use database. I think it's very interesting because we want to know what our audience want. In Philadelphia, we have around 10,000 Indonesian immigrants, and most of them are undocumented, and we want to know their stories, but they are afraid of telling us sometimes. So we want to know your database system. Thank you.
We do a couple of things. Mazin also does a variation of this, but what we do is look at existing databases of challenges and needs. I think that's the place to start. Most cities have a 211 system, which is run by United Way. It's a call center for low-income folks. You can get data by zip code, so if you're looking for a particular neighborhood, you can find out, like, when people are in trouble, what are they calling for? We look at 911 data a lot. What in Detroit has risen to the level of an emergency that's not even an emergency? And whose job is it to fix that and prevent that, and why aren't they doing it? We look at property data, who's getting ticketed for not doing something and who's not getting ticketed for not doing something. And then we do a survey over text message, and I think Mazin does this over WhatsApp, where we ask people about their challenges. We don't ask people what news you want. We don't ask people what information they need. We ask people, what do you need today that you don't have? What do you think is going to keep you or your family from achieving their goals over the next few months? And then we categorize those things into using the same rubric as United Way 211 uses. We use that, and then that's how we decide, like, okay, well, this person doesn't have gas money. That's a transportation problem, and, like, specifically, this is about cars. That's how we discover our beats. Yeah.
I love that. I hope somebody tweeted that so I can retweet it out in a minute as soon as I get off of here. We're going to come up here, and then I thought I saw some questions over there, so we'll come around to this side of the room in a second.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Tiffany Dubois Morales. I am the founder and CEO of Dubois Public Relations, LLC, based out of here in Philadelphia. I guess my main question has 3 components to it. But how important is cross-collaboration within your various positions in your organizations? What is something that us communications professionals can do to stay or get into the conversation of things that need to change? And then finally, what are some ways to be competitive within our industries without being marginalized as, you're somebody new or somebody different that's trying to do something that has traditionally been done by, white, older gentlemen. So, yeah.
I can take the first one about how we collaborate within the organization. So we have 3 community correspondents, one focused on the Latin American community, the Chinese community, and the Caribbean community in New York. And then we have 2 kind of more policy-focused immigration enforcement and labor reporters. And they work together in a really natural way. So the community correspondents are actually responsible for staying in touch with the community regularly. As our Latin American community correspondent manages the WhatsApp news service, is talking to people, responding to people's messages. People know him on a first-name basis. Then he's coming to the editorial meeting being like, this is what I'm hearing from the community. A lot of people are saying their Con Ed bill went up last week. Like, we should do a story about that. So he'll go out and report that, or a labor reporter will get a tip about something and be like, can you ask the community about it? So then he'll go to the news service and be like, hey, has anyone experienced this issue that has bubbled up for us recently? So then they work together naturally in that way. All have stories that are kind of cross community. So, it could be like a taxi cab crisis, or public safety has been a big conversation recently in New York City. So kind of trying to get like a cross community perspective on those types of issues.
Oh, we had a question on the other side of the room here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Paul Chung with the Center for Public Integrity. 2 questions. So the first question is, do you feel like you have to do you feel that you're code-switching less the past year in terms of fundraising with funders? First question. And the second question is, in terms of legacy media, oh, I saw you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi. In terms of legacy media, what is it that, how do you evaluate whether they're authentically trying to change versus checking the box?
Go, Sarah.
Code switching, I'm a shit fundraiser. It's not my job, and so I don't know. I can't answer that first part of the question. But I will say I have been very encouraged, and surprisingly so, by the degree to which the Detroit Free Press has really stretched itself and tried very hard to work with us. We now share a reporter with the Detroit Free Press, right? Whoa. I could not have imagined such a thing, because when we first started, it was difficult to even get them to publish our work, and they didn't have to pay for it. But they were so distrustful of our model, and it was never the journalism. The journalism's always been very, very good, but it was the model. And you know, I do think, and they have none of the structures that are going to allow them to thrive, right? Like, it is a ticking time bomb. But I think that they know this, and we're very lucky that at the leadership level, I think they're trying to create as much value as they possibly can in the time that they have left. And so I think that for legacy media that is not able to reimagine or is constrained by structures, that creating value along the way is like what I look for, right? And I'm interested in art, and I know if I want to work with somebody because they're more interested in like what is the value that they can produce today and tomorrow and the next day, rather than like, let me worry about my books in 20 years, because we have a crisis right now, and if you're just covering it, you're not doing enough.
I think to that funder question, a strategic decision that I made probably a couple of years ago now is to seek out philanthropic partnership with folks who I believed had aligned vision, right? And so for me, a lot of that has looked like looking for funding partners who are actually outside of the traditional journalism funders, and looking for funding partners who are funding like power building, movement work, and we have been very blessed, right, to be able to receive a lot more support from that. Scalawag was broke, right? And now, you know, we're going into our third year of being able to double our revenue. And I think it's because we don't have to explain to people what we're trying to do anymore. And, you know, I think it's not a coincidence that like a lot of our new program officers are Black women. And that has also been amazing to walk into a room and see other people who look like you and who share those lived experiences and say like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. And then to be like, yeah, like I get that. And like, let's talk about how you're going to do that instead of like what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Why, yeah.
I would also just add, diversified revenue model absolutely helps. The corporate sponsorship, sure, but philanthropic sponsorship, we at the 19th have personally been very surprised by the member support that we have gotten even in our first 2 years. We thought maybe we'd get a couple of thousand members, more than 10,000 people giving as little as $19 a month, or, you know, because they say, we believe in you, we're rooting for you, we need this work, we want it to continue. And so we're not dependent on any one revenue source, you know, for our sustainability. And I think that that is important, to not be beholden to any of those revenue sources. Yes, we're going to come here. Hi.
Hello, Andrew Ramsamy, Local Media Association, Word in Black, Knight LMA, Bloom Lab, and clearly Immigrant, because I do all those jobs.
Do it.
But question for you, what is the role of technology in what you're doing? It seems like, Cierra, you went deep in on SMS. Mazin, you're going deep on video. I know Scalawag has done, you know, wanting to do like a world-class print product while being digital at the same time too, but talk about how you've been using technology to either transform what you're doing and what you're learning about audiences and doing that work in a niche way.
Our tech is so far behind where we need it to be. Yes. It's like shocking. Yes. Our tech is shockingly bad. So bad. It is shocking that we have been able to do our job. And it's been such a struggle to do our job with these tools. But so we're trying to like build our own stuff now. We really didn't want to do that. We really didn't want to spend resources that way. Our resources are very small, and we don't want to recreate the wheel, but we have to.
Why was that necessary?
Oh my God.
Oh, okay. She's like, how much time we got?
I can't. But the reason why I think is the technology that we want to use is, again, this stuff that is undervalued. It's not the next best thing. It is not so exciting. It's not easy for people to see, how can we make millions of dollars off of this? I'm like, I need an SMS system that frickin' works every day, all day, and it's not exciting enough for people to invest in. And so we're dealing, again, with like scraps and like systems that are broken and are good enough for us, but they're not good enough. So we do have a technology problem. I think like what we're trying to do is work in a coalition of groups like ours to try to like come up with some solutions that that are going to be good enough and that hopefully we can build upon. But again, it's like you can't get people excited about investing in these kinds of things because they have not reimagined what they could make possible. They just want to see how much money they can make.
Yeah. Well, this is the end of this panel, unfortunately, but the beginning of the conversation. I hope that you all know that, and I hope that you continue to engage with these amazing panelists. Thank you so much again to Cierra, to Mazin, and to Cierra for a really robust conversation. And thank you so much to everybody for all of your thoughtful questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please join us in continuing to think big about how we can all work together to reimagine our beloved profession.
All right.